Leaders, builders, visionaries, and change agents. This is the Leadership Dr. SB, and today we are walking into a room that many leaders would rather avoid. We're talking about conflict. Not the kind of conflict that destroys teams when left unchecked, but the kind of conflict that, when handled with wisdom, maturity, and courage, can actually strengthen relationships, sharpen vision, and reveal what needs to really be healed. Today's episode is called Leaders Don't Avoid Conflict, They Master It. And let me say this from the beginning. Conflict is not always a sign that something is broken. Sometimes conflict is a sign that something important is at stake. When people care deeply, conflict may show up. When vision is changing, conflict may show up. When expectations are unclear, conflict may show up. When people feel unheard, unseen, or undervalued, conflict will definitely show up. The question is not whether conflict will come. The question is, will you have the leadership maturity to handle it when it arrives? Because avoiding conflict does not make it disappear. Avoiding conflict instills resentment. Avoided conflict becomes gossip. Avoided conflict becomes division. Avoided conflict becomes silence in the meeting and sabotage in the hallway. And leaders, we cannot heal what we refuse to face. So today, we're going to talk about how leaders move from conflict avoidance to conflict mastery. So think of it this way. Conflict is a leadership classroom. In fact, it's one of the greatest classrooms in leadership because it teaches you about communication. It teaches you about expectations. It teaches you about power. It teaches you about trust. It teaches you about emotional maturity. It teaches you about the hidden fractures inside your team, your organization, your ministry, or your business. Some leaders think conflict is an interruption to the work, but mature leaders understand conflict is often revealing the real work. That disagreement in the meeting may not simply be about the agenda. It may be about trust. That tension between team members may not simply be about personality. It may be about unclear roles. That resistance to change may not simply be stubbornness. It may be grief, fear, fatigue, or a lack of involvement in the process. So before you rush to shut conflict down, ask, what is the conflict trying to show you? Conflict is actually data. It gives you information about where there is confusion, where there is pain, where there is misalignment, and where leadership needs to step in with clarity. Don't fear the data, study it. Now, there's a phrase everybody is talking about here lately. Everybody uses the phrase protecting their peace and if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. But can I tell you something? Avoidance is not peace. Some leaders avoid conflict because they want to keep the peace. But here's the problem. Sometimes what we call peace is just really quiet dysfunction. Let me say that again. Sometimes what we call peace is really just quiet dysfunction. Everybody is smiling, but nobody is honest. Everybody is present, but nobody is engaged. Everybody is saying fine, but the culture is leaking trust. Friends, that is not peace. That is pressure wearing a polite face. Real peace is not the absence of difficult conversations. Real peace is the presence of truth. And truth with trust, respect, and accountability matters most. You cannot build a healthy team by pretending unhealthy patterns don't exist. You cannot build a thriving organization by sweeping tension under the rug. Eventually, what you bury will grow roots. And if you do not confront it early, you will have to clean it up later. Leaders, friends, avoidance is expensive. It costs time. It costs trust. It costs productivity. It costs morale. It costs credibility. The conflict you refuse to address today may become the crisis you are forced to manage tomorrow. Again, the conflict you refuse to manage today may be the crisis you're forced to manage tomorrow. Mastering conflict first starts with mastering the most difficult person to lead, yourself. Before you can mediate conflict between others, you have to manage the conflict in you. Because when tensions rise, the leader's emotional temperature matters. If you enter the conversation defensive, the room is going to feel it. If you enter the conversation angry, the room will react to it. If you enter the conversation fearful, the room will lose confidence. If you enter the conversation with ego, the room will become a battlefield. Leaders must learn how to pause before they pounce. Pause before you pounce. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I assuming? What do I need to understand before I respond? Let me let you in on a little secret. That third question will save your career, your life, your relationship, everything. What do I need to understand before I respond? Am I trying to solve this or simply win this? Let me ask that again. Am I trying to solve this or simply win this? Am I listening for truth or listening for weakness? Am I bringing calm or adding heat? Conflict mastery begins with self-mastery. The goal is not to suppress emotion. The goal is to steward emotion. You can be passionate without being reckless. You can be firm without being cruel. You can be direct without being disruptive or destructive. You can be honest without being harsh. That is the mark of a mature leader. Listen, there are going to come moments where you're going to have to listen for the story beneath the statements. In conflict, people often lead with positions. I'm not doing that. That's not fair. You never listen. This process does not work. They always get their way. I'm tired of being ignored. But underneath every position is usually a story worth listening to. A story about being overlooked, a story about being disappointed, a story about feeling powerless, a story about losing trust, a story about unmet expectations, a story about wanting dignity. Leaders who master conflict do not just listen to the words, they listen for the wound. Let me say that again. Leaders who master conflict do not just listen to the words, they listen for the wound. Because sometimes the loudest person in the room is not trying to be difficult, they're just trying to be heard. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is not in agreement. They have simply stopped believing that speaking up makes a difference. So in conflict mediation, your first responsibility is not rush to a verdict. Your first responsibility is to create enough safety for truth to come forward. That means asking better questions. Help me understand from your perspective what happened. What did you need that you didn't receive? What expectation was missed? What impact did this have on you or the team? What would repair look like from your point of view? What are you willing to own in this situation? That last question matters, because healthy mediation does not only ask who hurt you, it also asks, what part of this are you responsible for healing? Take that in. If you're going to do this right, you got to separate the person from the problem. One of the most important principles in conflict mediation is this: do not attack the person, address the problem. When conflict becomes personal, people become defensive. And once people become defensive, they stop listening for understanding and start listening for ammunition. Think about that. Leaders must keep the conversation focused. Instead of saying you're irresponsible, say the deadline was missed and it affected the team's ability to move forward. Instead of saying you're disrespectful, say the tone in that meeting made it difficult for others to contribute. Instead of saying you do not care, say there seems to be a gap between what was agreed upon and what was delivered. That shift matters because when you label people, they protect themselves. When you name behaviors, they can address them. Again, when you label people, they protect themselves. When you name behaviors, they can address them. Conflict mastery requires language discipline. Your words can either build a bridge or burn one. Your words can either invite ownership or trigger shame. Your words can either open the door to repair or lock people deeper into resistance. So speak with clarity, but also, please, speak with care. Now, mediation requires some structure to it. Don't walk into conflict without a process. Good intentions are good, but they're not enough. If the conversation is emotional, unresolved, or layered, you need structure. Here is a simple mediation framework leaders can use. First, set the purpose. Say, we're here to understand what happened, address the impact, and agree on a path forward. Second, establish the ground rules. No interrupting, no personal attacks, no rewriting history to avoid responsibility, no weaponizing private information, no leaving without identifying next steps. Then third, allow each person to share their perspective, not to perform, not to attack, but to be heard. And then fourth, identify the real issue. Is this about communication, role clarity, trust, resources, decision-making, power, equity, accountability? Number 5, name the impact. How did this affect the people involved? How did it affect the team? How did it affect the mission? Number 6, move toward repair. What needs to be acknowledged? What needs to change? What agreement needs to be made? And then 7, document the next steps. Who will do what? By when? How will we follow up? Because mediation without follow-up is just a conversation. And leadership requires closure. Now, don't confuse reconciliation with agreement. The goal of conflict mediation is not always agreement. Sometimes the goal is simply understanding, or clarity, or accountability. Sometimes it's establishing boundaries, deciding how to move forward even when people still see things differently. Everybody does not always have to agree on every detail to behave with respect. Everybody does not have to share the same perspective to honor the same mission. Everybody does not have to feel comfortable to be responsible. As a leader, you are not always called to make everybody happy. You are called to make the environment healthy. Let me say that again. As a leader, you are not called to make everybody happy, because you can't. You are called to make the environment healthy. And sometimes health requires the hard truth. Sometimes health requires a boundary. Sometimes health requires saying this behavior cannot continue. Sometimes health requires saying we can disagree, but we will not disrespect. Sometimes health requires saying we're going to move forward with clarity, not confusion. That is leadership. Conflict can become the work culture. Every conflict teaches your team what kind of culture you really have. Not the culture written on the wall, on the picture, and on the poster, but the culture that lives in the hallway. How does your organization handle disagreement? Do people feel safe telling the truth? Do leaders listen before deciding? Are expectations clear? Are people held accountable consistently? Are concerns addressed early? Are apologies modeled by leadership? Are repairs made after harm? Culture is not proven when everyone agrees. Culture is proven when tension enters the room. If your team can disagree honestly, repair quickly, and return to the mission with maturity, then you are building a strong culture. But if conflict always turns into silence, gossip, blame, punishment, or avoidance, then the culture needs some serious leadership attention. Conflict is not just interpersonal. Conflict is cultural. And leaders are responsible for the conditions that either fuel it or heal it. Now, I want to talk about something that's sometimes difficult: the courage to go first. Sometimes the leader has to go first. You may have to be the first to say, "I did not handle that well. I should have communicated sooner. I hear the impact of my decision. I want to understand what I missed. I apologize for the way that landed. Here is what I will do differently." That doesn't make you weak. That makes you trustworthy. Leaders who cannot apologize cannot build trust. And candidly, I don't trust a leader who don't apologize. Leaders who cannot listen well cannot lead. Leaders who cannot receive feedback cannot mediate conflict with integrity. How you gonna give feedback but you can't take it? The courage to go first often gives others permission to be honest, humble, and responsible too. Somebody has to lower the temperature. Somebody has to model the maturity. Somebody has to choose healing over ego. Why not you as the leader? Hear me clearly. Conflict is not your enemy. Unaddressed conflict is your enemy. Dishonesty, peace is your enemy. Ego-driven leadership is your enemy. Fear-based avoidance is your enemy. But conflict handled with wisdom can become a doorway to growth. It can deepen trust. It can clarify expectations. It can expose broken systems. It can strengthen communication. It can build emotional maturity. It can move the team from pretending to progressing. So do not run from conflict. Master it. Do not avoid the hard conversations. Prepare for it. Do not shame people for disagreement. Teach them how to disagree with dignity. Do not let tension sit in the room like an untreated wound. Bring wisdom, structure, trust, truth, and grace to the table. Because leaders do not avoid conflict, they master it. Now, you already know what time it is. I'm going to give you the diagnosis and the prescription. So the diagnosis is conflict avoidance syndrome. Say it with me: conflict avoidance syndrome. This condition shows up when leaders mistake silence for peace. They delay hard conversations and allow tensions to grow beneath the surface, and hope unresolved issues will somehow solve themselves. Symptoms include passive-aggressive communication, hallway communications and conversations after meetings, declining trust, unclear expectations, emotional withdrawals, team divisions, and repeated problems that never seem to get resolved. Conflict avoidance syndrome is dangerous because it lets dysfunction dress up as diplomacy. It tells leaders, don't say anything, it will pass. But it doesn't pass. It grows. And eventually what could have been a conversation becomes a crisis. So here is your prescription: the Conflict Mastery Protocol. For the next 30 days, practice the Conflict Mastery Protocol. First, pause before reacting. Do not let your first emotion become your final response. Second, name the real issue. Ask yourself, is this about behavior, trust, communication, expectations, power or process. Third, bring people to the table, not the courtroom. The goal is not to embarrass, accuse, or punish. The goal is to understand, repair, and move forward. Fourth, use clear and respectful language. Attack the problem, not the person. Fifth, create a written plan or a written agreement for next steps. Do not let the conversation end with vague promises. Leave with ownership, timelines, and follow-up. And finally, review the repair. After the conversation, come back and ask, are we better? Are we clearer? Are we moving differently? That is the prescription. Leader, this week, do not avoid the hard conversations. Do not avoid the conversations that could unlock the culture. Do not postpone the clarity that should restore the trust and could restore the trust. Do not fear the tension that could reveal the truth. Conflict is not proof that you are failing. Handled well, conflict can be proof that you are leading. This has been the Leadership Dr. SB, reminding you today that leadership is not just about vision. It is about courage. It is about clarity. It is about healing what others are willing to hide. Until the next time, keep leading with wisdom, my friends, speaking with truth, and keep building cultures where people do not have to choose between honesty and belonging. Because leaders do not avoid conflict, they master it. Again, thank you for your support on this journey. The link for the Connect to Lead course is in the description, and I look forward to engaging with you. Be well. Let me ask you something. Why do talented teams still struggle? Why do capable leaders still deal with miscommunication, tension, and disengagement? It's not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of effort. It's a lack of connection. Because when people don't feel understood, they disengage. When they don't feel valued, they disconnect. And when that happens, performance suffers. At the Leadership Dr. SB, we call this the relationship gap. And it's the reason so many leaders fall short, not because they can't lead, but because they've never been taught how to truly connect. That's why, on my birthday, April the 15th, we are launching a new leadership experience called Connect to Lead. It's a course designed to help you build trust faster, communicate with clarity and impact, strengthen your alignment across your team, and lead in a way people actually respond to. Because the truth is simple. You don't lead first, you connect first. Now, this season is a powerful one. Alongside the course, I've also released 2 new books, each one designed to develop a different dimension of leadership and personal growth. The Posture of Leadership will be available on April the 15th on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles, focuses on how you show up as a leader, your mindset, your presence, and your consistency. And for women navigating faith, resilience, in real life, I've released 365 Days of Grace and Grit that is also available now on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. It's a devotional guide designed to strengthen your spirit day by day. These are 3 distinct resources, one to shape your inner posture, one to strengthen your daily resilience, and one to transform how you connect and lead with others. Thank you for your support thus far. Again, I'm the Leadership Dr. SB, and if you're ready to elevate how you lead, transform how you connect, and close gaps that's been holding you back, get ready, because April the 15th is upon us and Connect to Lead is coming. Subscribe, stay connected, and I'll see you soon. Be well.